At Thanksgiving dinner, my brother stood up and announced, "Don't come to my wedding." We voted, "You're not family anymore." Everyone cheered. I laughed softly and said, "Then I guess you won't need this." I placed a folder on the table. The moment he opened it, he started screaming. "I'm Michael, I'm 32 years old, and at Thanksgiving dinner, my own family, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, voted to ceremoniously kick me out of their lives." Before I tell you exactly how a single, unassuming manila folder made my golden boy brother choke on his words and sent my parents into a desperate, begging tailspin, do me a solid and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always good to know who's out there listening. The air in my parents' dining room was heavy. It wasn't just the rich, savory scent of my mother's roast turkey and sage stuffing. It was thick with years of unspoken resentments, simmering just below a carefully polished surface of holiday cheer. It was an atmosphere I knew well, one I had learned to navigate by making myself as small and as quiet as possible. Every year was a perfect replica of the last. The same heavy, dark wood table meticulously set with the good china that only saw the light of day twice a year. The same crystal glasses, filled with wine for everyone but me. I had to drive. The same forced, brittle smiles stretched across faces that, in private, were set in lines of disappointment or disapproval, usually directed at me. My brother, Nathan, the heir apparent to the family throne, sat in my father's usual spot at the head of the table. He leaned back in the chair with an air of smug ownership, his fiancée, Jessica, beaming beside him. She was lovely, but she had the slightly bewildered look of a tourist in a hostile country, trying to make sense of the local customs. My mother, Margaret, fluttered around Nathan, refilling his glass, touching his shoulder, her face alight with a kind of fierce, possessive pride. My father, Richard, had already retreated into his usual silence, his attention fixed on carving the turkey with an intensity that bordered on surgical. And my Uncle Mitch, as predictable as the setting sun, was already slurring his words, laughing uproariously at one of Nathan's decidedly unfunny jokes. My goal, as always, was simple: survive. Eat the dry turkey, pass the mashed potatoes, offer quiet, non-committal answers, and escape before the post-dinner inquisition could begin. I was a ghost at my own family's feast. But this year was different. Nathan pushed his chair back, the sound unnaturally loud in a brief lull in conversation. He tapped his wine glass with a fork, a gesture he'd clearly seen in a movie. That self-satisfied, punchable smirk was plastered on his face. "If I could have everyone's attention, please," he announced, his voice filled with a practiced, hollow sincerity. "Jessica and I have been doing a lot of thinking lately. Thinking about the wedding, about the future, and about what family really means. It's about support. It's about being on the same team." He let his gaze sweep across the table, a king surveying his court, before it landed with deliberate weight on me. The smirk stretched, becoming predatory. "And after much discussion, we've made a collective decision. We've taken a vote, actually." He paused, savoring the moment, the absolute power he felt he wielded. "Michael, we're officially asking you not to come to the wedding. We've all decided that you're just not part of this family anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. It was broken by a sound that would be seared into my memory forever. The soft, delicate sound of my own mother clapping. Just 2 or 3 polite, approving claps. "Well," she said, her voice clear and bright, "someone had to be the one to say it. It's for the best." Uncle Mitch, loyal court jester, raised his glass high. "Here, here, to family. The real family." My father, refusing to meet my eyes, gave a short, sharp nod. "The boy's right. It's time." The world tilted on its axis. The sounds in the room, the clinking of glasses, my mother's sigh of relief, seemed to warp and distort, coming to me as if through a long tunnel. A wave of nausea rolled through my stomach. A hot, tingling pressure built behind my eyes. I felt the familiar urge to shrink, to apologize, to ask what I had done wrong, even though I already knew the answer. My crime was my very existence. But then, something inside me, something I thought had died long ago, snapped into place. It was a cold, hard certainty. The panic receded, replaced by a strange and liberating calm. The calm of a man who had finally hit rock bottom and realized he could stand up. I didn't shout. I didn't protest. I didn't even allow the hurt to show on my face. I simply reached down beside my chair, my movements measured and deliberate, and picked up the thin manila folder that rested against the leg of my chair. I placed it on the crisp, white tablecloth, its beige simplicity a stark contrast to the festive chaos. It landed with a soft, definitive thud. I looked at Nathan, and for the first time in years, I held his gaze until he looked away. A small, quiet laugh escaped my lips. It was a sound he had never heard from me before. "Then I guess," I said, my voice perfectly level, "you won't be needing this." The smirk on Nathan's face finally vanished, replaced by a flicker of confusion. He looked from my impassive face to the folder, then back again. Hesitantly, as if he were afraid it might bite him, he picked it up. He fumbled with the metal clasp for a second before opening it. He didn't scream. He didn't yell. What happened was far more satisfying. As his eyes scanned the first printed page, a wave of shock washed over his features. The healthy, confident color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, sickly pallor. His jaw went slack, his mouth opening and closing silently like a fish gasping for air. The folder, forgotten, slipped from his trembling fingers, spilling its neatly organized contents across the table like a fan of damning tarot cards. And in the sudden, crushing silence of that Thanksgiving dinner, the only sound you could hear was my brother's ragged, panicked, wheezing breath. The party was officially over. To truly understand the profound calm that settled over me in that moment, to grasp why my hand was as steady as a rock when I placed that folder on the table, you need to rewind 1 week. It all began, as these things so often did, with a phone call from my mother, her voice dripping with a saccharine sweetness that always set my teeth on edge. "Michael, darling," she began, the word darling a verbal Trojan horse, concealing an impending demand. "I was just on the phone with the wedding planner. Everything is coming together so beautifully for Nathan and Jessica. It's going to be the event of the season." "That's great, Mom," I replied, my voice carefully neutral. I was at my desk, staring at a complex financial projection for a client, the numbers blurring together. I knew this wasn't a casual update. It was the preamble. "It is," she continued, her voice chirpy. "But you know how these things are, honey. The little details, they just add up so quickly. The caterer wants the final numbers. The florist has the most divine ideas for the centerpieces. And Nathan has his heart set on a string quartet for the cocktail hour. He says it adds a touch of class." There it was. The string quartet. Not a string trio. A quartet. "The thing is," she said, her voice dropping into a more conspiratorial, intimate tone, "the deposit for the musicians is due by Friday. Nathan was hoping, and Richard and I agree it's only right that you could take care of it. As a wedding gift. You're his only brother, after all. It's your duty to support him." My duty. I closed my eyes, the bridge of my nose throbbing. It wasn't enough that I'd shelled out $5,000 for their engagement party at a ridiculously overpriced restaurant. It wasn't enough that I was expected to rent a tuxedo that cost more than my first car. Now it was a string quartet. "Mom," I said, pinching the bridge of my nose, trying to keep my voice from cracking. "I can't." The silence that met my words was immediate and glacial. The syrupy sweetness vanished, instantly replaced by a sharp, brittle ice. "What do you mean you can't?" she asked, her voice dangerously low. "Michael, don't be difficult. This is for your brother. This is for the family. I understand that. I can't do it," I said. It was a partial lie. As a financial analyst for a respectable firm, I could technically afford it. I was meticulous with my finances, a trait born from a lifetime of watching my family's reckless spending. The truth wasn't that I couldn't. It was that I wouldn't. The well had finally run dry. As she started her next sentence, a memory, vivid and galling, flashed through my mind. I was 27, standing outside the Serenity Shores Wellness Center in Malibu. My parents had called me a month prior in a manufactured panic. Nathan had a problem. He was exhausted, on the verge of a breakdown. They'd found this exclusive facility that could help him. The cost was $10,000. "He'll lose his job, Michael," my father had said, his voice grave. "You're the only one who can save him." I paid it. I transferred the money from my savings, money I had been setting aside for a down payment on a condo. A week later, a friend who lived in LA sent me a photo from a celebrity gossip site. There was Nathan, tan and smiling, arm in arm with a C-list reality TV star at a beach party in Malibu. His rehab was a glorified vacation. When I'd confronted him, he just laughed. "Lighten up, bro. It was a networking opportunity. You got to invest in my future. After everything this family has done for you." My mother's voice, sharp with indignation, pulled me back to the present. The words ignited a fuse inside me. "Everything you've done for me?" I heard myself say, the volume rising. "Are you serious? Mom?" I moved out of the house at 19 with 2 suitcases and $1,000 I'd saved from my summer job. I put myself through state college working 2, sometimes 3 jobs. I have never, not once, asked you or Dad for a single penny. "Don't you dare take that tone with me, young man," she snapped, her voice trembling with rage. "Your brother's path has been more challenging. He's a creative spirit. He feels things more deeply. You've always been the steady, responsible one. It is your place to help your family." My place, my role, the family fixer, the human safety net, the reliable, boring son whose only value was his ability to clean up the messes left in the glittering wake of the charming, irresponsible golden child. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it felt like a thunderclap in my own ears. "My place is to live my own life. I am not paying for a string quartet." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It was the silence of a queen whose authority had just been challenged by a peasant. "You will regret this, Michael," she said, her voice a low, venomous hiss. "Mark my words." Then the line went dead. I sat there for a long time, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. My heart was pounding like a drum against my ribs. My hands were shaking. This was different. This was a declaration of war. The next day I called David. He listened patiently as I recounted the entire conversation, my voice still shaky. When I was finished, he let out a long, low whistle. "Okay," he said. "So this is it. The gloves are off. You know what comes next, right?" "What?" I asked, though a cold dread was already coiling in my gut. "The smear campaign," he said bluntly. "The character assassination. They're going to paint you as the villain, the selfish, ungrateful son who abandoned his family in their time of need. You need to get ahead of it, Mike. You need to prepare for the worst." He paused. "Remember what I told you years ago? About my uncle? His kids convinced him he was losing his mind so they could get power of attorney. This stuff gets ugly." His words sent a chill down my spine. "So what do I do? When was the last time they called you just to see how you were, Mike?" David asked, his question pointed. No requests, no drama, just a, "Hey, how's it going?" I thought about it. I honestly couldn't remember. "It's been years." "Exactly," David said. "You're not a son to them. You're a resource. And when a resource stops producing, it gets disposed of. You need to stop thinking like a son and start thinking like a strategist. That spreadsheet you told me about? It's time to weaponize it. And you need to see a lawyer. Today." The word lawyer still terrified me. It felt like such an aggressive final step. But David was right. The house was already on fire. I couldn't pretend otherwise anymore. That afternoon, I found myself sitting across from Ms. Albright again. She was a formidable woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through me. I had met her once before, for a brief consultation a year ago that I'd been too afraid to act on. This time was different. I was ready. I laid it all out for her. The phone call, the long history of financial demands, my fears about what they might do next. She listened, her fingers steepled, her expression unreadable. "Financial abuse within a family unit is insidious, Mr. Evans," she said when I had finished. "Perpetrators often use love and obligation as leverage. The very nature of the relationship makes the victim feel guilty for establishing boundaries." She slid a series of pamphlets across her polished desk. Revocation of power of attorney, last will and testament, creation of a living trust. These are not weapons. They are shields. They are legal boundaries that protect you when emotional ones have failed. She explained the process, the legal language, the implications. She was patient, answering my questions, assuaging my fears. There was a moment, as I held the heavy pen over the first signature line, where I hesitated. A lifetime of ingrained guilt washed over me. "This is your mother. This is your father." Ms. Albright seemed to sense my turmoil. "Mr. Evans," she said gently, "who has been protecting you up until now?" The question hit me like a physical blow. The answer was simple. No one. I took a deep breath, the air shuddering in my lungs. "No one," I whispered. Then, more firmly, "I have." "Then let's make sure you can continue to do so, legally and securely," she said. I signed the papers. My signature, usually a smooth scrawl, was jagged and tight. But it was there. I signed away their power over me. I signed away their claim to my future. As I left her office, clutching the folder containing the notarized copies, I felt like I had just run a marathon. I was drained, terrified, but for the first time, I felt a flicker of what it must be like to be truly in control of my own life. A few days of blessed silence passed. Then, the text message from my cousin Laura arrived. "Hey Mike, you have to come to Thanksgiving next week. Mom and Nathan have something they want to talk to you about. It's important." My blood ran cold, but this time it was a cold, clear resolve. The summons, the public trial. They were planning my execution. The old me would have been paralyzed with anxiety, would have called in sick, would have hidden. The new me stood up and walked to my printer. I opened the encrypted Excel file, the one titled Family Ledger. I hit print. Page after page slid out, a detailed, undeniable history of my servitude. I three-hole punched the stack of papers and placed them neatly in the manila folder, right behind the legal documents from Ms. Albright's office. I picked up my phone. My fingers were steady as I typed out the reply to Laura. Wouldn't miss it for the world. They had set the stage for a sacrifice. They had no idea I was bringing my own script. The silence at the Thanksgiving table stretched into a tense, unbearable eternity. Nathan, the golden child, looked like his strings had been cut. A puppet slumped in his chair, staring at the damning evidence of his own greed scattered across the pristine white tablecloth. It was Jessica who finally broke the spell. Her movements were sharp, precise. The engagement ring, a 2-carat diamond I knew for a fact had been financed by a personal loan from me for his failing business, seemed to mock me from her finger as she reached out. She didn't grab the whole pile of papers. Her eyes, the intelligent, assessing eyes of a paralegal, zeroed in on the top sheet. It was the master spreadsheet, the one with the cold, hard numbers. I watched her face as she read, and it was like watching a detective solve a crime in real time. Her expression shifted from confusion to dawning comprehension, then hardened into a cold, furious certainty. I could almost hear the numbers clicking in her head as her finger traced the columns. June 2020. $10,000. Reason given, Nathan's rehab. Payee, Serenity Shores Wellness Center. March 2021. $15,000. Reason given, emergency credit card debt consolidation. Payee Margaret Evans. September 2022. $7,000. Reason given, Laura's college tuition. Payee, Northwood Community College. As her eyes flickered over the line item for my mother's credit card debt, a bitter memory surfaced. I was sitting in my car outside their house. My mother was in the passenger seat, weeping. Not loud, hysterical sobs, but quiet, dignified, perfectly practiced tears. "I don't know how it happened, Michael. The interest, it got away from me. Richard will be so disappointed in me. I feel like such a failure. I had felt a surge of pity, of protective instinct. I'd logged into my bank account on my phone right there and transferred the money. The very next day, she'd posted a photo on social media of a new designer handbag that cost more than my rent. The caption read, "Sometimes you just have to treat yourself. #blessed. Jessica's fingers stopped, pressing down hard on a line item near the bottom of the page. May 2024, $5,000. Reason given, emergency family loan. P. Nathan Evans. Her jaw tightened. I knew she was connecting dots I hadn't even realized were there to be connected. Her eyes lifted from the page and met mine for a fraction of a second. It wasn't a look of pity. It was a look of grim confirmation. But it was the next set of pages, tucked behind the spreadsheet, that truly detonated the bomb. I had hesitated to include them, felt so personal, so deeply vindictive. But David's voice had been adamant. Truth, Mike, not vengeance. They need to see the whole truth. They were screenshots. A text conversation between Nathan and his best friend, a guy named Todd. Jessica's breath caught in her throat. A tiny, sharp gasp that was louder than a scream in the silent room. I knew the exact words her eyes were tracing on the page. Nathan. Dude, the ATM is complaining again. Gonna have to make another withdrawal for the wedding. Todd. Your brother? Nathan. Who else? Just gotta squeeze the cash cow one more time. He'll fold. He always does. Is what he's for. The cash cow. Is what he's for. Not a brother. Not a person. A function. An appliance designed for dispensing cash. Jessica placed the pages down on the table with a slow, deliberate motion. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at my stunned parents. Her entire focus narrowed and became a laser beam pointed directly at the man she had agreed to spend her life with. The cash cow? She asked. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it sliced through the tension like a shard of glass. Nathan flinched, physically recoiling as if she'd slapped him. Jess, baby, come on, he stammered, attempting a charming, dismissive laugh that died in his throat. That's just locker room talk. A joke. Is it a joke, Nathan? Her voice was dangerously calm, devoid of all emotion. Is the $73,450 he has given to you and your parents a joke? She had already scanned the total at the bottom of the spreadsheet. She hadn't missed a single detail. That is not fair, my mother shrieked, finding her voice. That money was for family necessities. Michael was more than happy to help his family. Was he? Jessica's head snapped towards my mother, her eyes flashing. Was he happy when his own brother was calling him a machine behind his back? Was he happy when you were spending his emergency loan on a cruise? My mother's mouth fell open. The cruise. Jessica had seen it. She had seen it all. Then, Jessica's entire demeanor shifted. It was a chilling transformation. A new, cold certainty settled over her. The look of a person whose deepest, most private fears had just been validated in the most humiliating way possible. The folder hadn't just given her new information. It had confirmed a pattern of deceit she had likely already sensed. Let me ask you another question, Nathan, she said, her voice dropping to an icy whisper. The $5,000 for the leaky roof back in May. Did that happen to coincide with your business trip to Santa Monica? Nathan's face, which I thought couldn't get any paler, turned a ghastly shade of gray. I have no idea what you're talking about, he sputtered, his eyes darting around the room, looking for an escape route. Don't you? Jessica's voice was pure venom. She didn't need my folder anymore. This next part was all hers. She slowly reached into her elegant clutch purse, her movements deliberate, and pulled out her own phone. She swiped a few times, her manicured thumb moving with deadly purpose. Then she turned the screen towards him. Because I do. I've been wondering about your late nights at the office for months. She didn't need to show the rest of us. I saw the horrifying reflection in Nathan's wide, terrified eyes. It was a picture, a selfie. Nathan, grinning foolishly, with his arm wrapped tightly around a blonde woman who was definitely not Jessica. They were in what looked like a hotel bar, a half-empty martini glass in front of them. Her name is Alex, isn't it? Jessica said, the name dropping into the silence like a coffin lid slamming shut. A marketing consultant from the LA office. You told me you couldn't stand her. I found the hotel receipts in your travel bag when I was unpacking for you. Receipts for a suite, Nathan. For 2 people. I told myself I was crazy, that I was being the jealous fiancé. She gave a short, bitter laugh. Turns out I wasn't being jealous enough. The dining room imploded. Jessica, this is a family matter. This is not the time or the place. My mother screeched, lunging to her feet so quickly that her chair skittered backwards. You are airing our dirty laundry in front of Michael. The supreme irony of her statement seemed to soar right over her head. Sit down, Margaret. My father commanded, his voice a low, rumbling growl. He wasn't looking at me or Jessica. He was glaring at Nathan with a look of pure, murderous rage. It was the fury of a man whose carefully maintained illusion of a perfect family had just been publicly and violently shattered. Uncle Mitch was staring, his jaw slack, a piece of turkey forgotten on his fork. Laura looked like she wanted to evaporate. Nathan, trapped and desperate, did what he had always done his entire life. He deflected. He lashed out. He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at me. This is your fault, he snarled, his face contorted in a mask of hate. You did this. You brought this poison into our home. You were always jealous of me. Your home, I asked, my voice dangerously quiet, and as the chaos swirled around me, as the accusations flew, I felt that strange, preternatural calm descend once more. The financial records were the opening shot. The affair was the unexpected, devastating flank attack from an ally I never knew I had. But the final, decisive blow, that was mine to deliver. I slowly pushed my own chair back and rose to my feet. Instantly, as if on cue, the shouting died down. Every head in the room swiveled towards me. They all stared, their faces a bizarre gallery of anger, shock, and dawning fear. They were waiting for me to break, to yell, to cry, to make a scene. They had absolutely no idea what was coming next. The silence that fell over the room was absolute, a thick, heavy blanket smothering the embers of their chaotic shouting. It was as if my simple act of standing had sucked all the air out of the room. Every eye was on me, waiting. For the first time in 32 years, in that house I was not invisible. I was the center of gravity. I didn't speak immediately. I let the silence hang, letting them squirm in the wreckage they had created. I let my gaze travel deliberately from one face to the next, and I saw them with a clarity that was both painful and liberating. I wasn't looking at my family anymore. I was looking at a collection of individuals, their masks of civility stripped away, their true natures laid bare. My eyes found my father, Richard. He had finally torn his gaze away from Nathan and was now staring at his own hands, which were clenched into tight, white-knuckled fists on the polished table. This was the man who lectured me about responsibility, about the importance of a good name. The man whose entire philosophy was to avoid conflict at any cost. His peace had always been purchased with my money and my silence. You know, Dad, I began. My voice was not loud, but it was clear and steady, and it cut through the silence like a scalpel. Every time Nathan got into trouble, every time he needed a bailout, you'd pull me aside. You'd say, Michael, you have to be the bigger person. You'd talk about keeping the peace, about not making waves. I took a deliberate step toward the table, and he flinched. But it was never about peace, was it? It was about convenience. It was about preserving your quiet, orderly world. You would have sacrificed anything or anyone to avoid a difficult conversation, to avoid having to actually parent your favorite son. Your fear of conflict needed a shield to hide behind. And you made sure I was that shield. He winced as if I'd struck him, his shoulders slumping. He couldn't meet my eyes. He couldn't deny a single word. Next, my gaze shifted to my mother. She was glaring at me, her face a mask of righteous indignation, her chest rising and falling in shallow, angry breaths. She was already constructing the story in her head, The one where she was the noble, wounded matriarch, betrayed by her cold, ungrateful son. "And you, Mom," I said, my voice softening just a fraction, but with an underlying edge of steel that made her sit up straighter. "You were the master of the word family. We're a family, Michael. We have to stick together. This is what families do for each other." But family was never a source of comfort coming from you. It was a tool. It was the leverage you used to get what you wanted. I saw a flicker of her own memory in her eyes as I continued. "You knew Nathan was a black hole of irresponsibility, so you made me his personal bank. You knew you spent money like it was water, so you made me your emergency fund. You were so terrified of what the neighbors might think, so terrified of your perfect family image being tarnished, that you used love and guilt like a hammer and anvil, forging me into the shape you needed me to be." I paused, letting the truth of it settle in the air between us. Your ambition, your fear of social failure, needed a hostage to guarantee your lifestyle. And I was always that hostage. Fat, theatrical tears welled in her eyes. They weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of pure fury at having her methods exposed. "How dare you?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a rage that was almost palpable. "After all the sacrifices I have made for you boys." I didn't even bother to respond. My gaze moved to the broken figure at the end of the table. My brother, Nathan. He looked like a deflated balloon, all his arrogant bluster gone, replaced by a sullen, childish pout. "And you, Nathan," I said. The anger I thought I would feel was gone, replaced by a vast, weary pity. "You were the sun everyone orbited around, the golden child. You never had to face a single real-world consequence for any of your actions, because I was always there, standing in the shadows, ready to clean up your mess. You failed a class? I'd pay for you to retake it. You crashed a car? I'd cover the insurance deductible. You needed a loan for a business idea? My checkbook was always open." I gestured to the scattered papers, the sordid proof of his lies and betrayals. "Your weakness, your complete inability to stand on your own 2 feet, needed a crutch to lean on for your entire life." I looked him straight in the eye. "I was that crutch, and now I'm taking it away. You're finally going to have to learn how to stand up by yourself. I hope you don't fall." He opened his mouth, a pathetic whimper escaping, but no words followed. I took a final, deep breath. The time for analysis was over. It was time for the verdict. "You stood there," I said, my eyes sweeping across all of their stunned faces one last time, "and you talked about a vote. You announced that you had all voted me out of the family. It was a very decisive action, very democratic." I reached into the inner pocket of my suit jacket, the one place they hadn't thought to look, the one place I had kept my real power. My fingers closed around a set of crisp, professionally folded documents. "It was such a bold idea," I continued, my voice dangerously calm as I pulled the documents out and held them up for all to see. "It was inspiring. So, I decided to hold a vote of my own. I let my gaze settle on my parents, the architects of my misery. The result," I said, "was unanimous." With a deliberate, almost theatrical slowness, I unfolded the documents. The sound of the heavy bond paper crackling was the only noise in the room. It sounded like ice breaking apart. This wasn't a printout from my home office. This was the real thing bearing the weight of the law. "This first document," I announced, placing it with a soft thud on the table directly in front of my father, whose face had gone a waxy, unhealthy color, "is a legally executed and notarized revocation of power of attorney. It was signed and filed with my attorney last Tuesday. It states in clear, unambiguous language that you, Richard Evans, and you, Margaret Evans, are hereby stripped of any and all legal authority regarding my financial assets and my medical care, effective immediately." My father stared at the dense block of text, his lips moving silently as he read. His eyes, when they finally lifted to meet mine, were wide with a kind of primal horror that was far more satisfying than fear. It was the horror of a man realizing his ultimate control had been an illusion all along. "Let me translate," I said, My voice is cold and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. It means that if I am in a car accident tonight, if I am lying in a coma in some hospital, your phone will not ring. You will not be consulted. You will not have the authority to make a single decision about my life or my death. You will not be allowed to stand by my bedside and play the part of the grieving parents for the nurses. As far as the law is concerned in matters of my life, you no longer exist. A strangled, guttural sound escaped my mother's throat. You can't do that, she breathed, shaking her head in frantic denial. I'm your mother. You were, I corrected her gently. And I can. And I have. I turned my attention to her, placing the second document directly in front of her trembling hands. This, I said, is a copy of my new last will and testament, also finalized and witnessed last week. It outlines the complete and total disposition of my estate. I let her eyes scan the first paragraph before I continued. My entire estate, my savings, my investment portfolio, my retirement accounts, my personal property, everything I have spent my entire adult life working for, will be left to two parties. A significant portion to a charitable trust I've established to provide financial literacy scholarships for underprivileged students, and the remainder to my friend, David Miller, who has also been appointed as the sole executor of my estate. I leaned forward, dropping my voice so only she and my father could hear. There is a specific clause on page 3, section C. It's called an in terrorem clause. But more importantly, it explicitly disinherits you, Margaret Evans, and you, Nathan Evans. It specifically names you and states that you are to receive nothing. Not $1. Not one piece of furniture. Not a single photograph. Nothing. That was the kill shot. It was always about the money, the inheritance, the great, unspoken promise that had kept them tethered to me. The golden parachute they had always assumed would be waiting for them at the end of my long, responsible life. It was their reward for all their years of putting up with me. I watched the truth of it land, watched the mask of maternal indignation crumble and fall away, revealing the raw, naked panic of a gambler who has just lost everything on a single, final hand. My house, she whispered, the words catching in her throat. She didn't mean my apartment. She meant her house. The oversized colonial they were living in, the one with the second mortgage and the property taxes they were constantly complaining about. The house they always assumed I would either bail out or that would be theirs, free and clear upon my death. It was never going to be your house, Mom, I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. I had one more document. I held it up. And this last one is just a collection of administrative changes. New emergency contact information for my employer. New beneficiaries on my life insurance policy. A new contact for my landlord. The circle is complete. The ties have been severed. I let the papers sit there on the table. A paper tombstone marking the death of their expectations. A legal fortress I had built around the rest of my life. Nathan, who had been sitting in a catatonic state, was finally jolted back to life by the finality in my voice. But it wasn't the golden boy's roar of anger. It was the pathetic, pleading whine of a lost child. Why? He cried, his voice cracking. Michael, why would you do this to us? We're your family. The words were so absurd, so completely detached from the reality of the last hour, that I almost laughed. You told me I wasn't, I replied, my voice as flat and empty as a winter sky. You voted. Remember? You stood right there, puffed up with pride, and you announced the results to the whole room. I just took you at your word. I just made sure the paperwork matched your decision. I looked him straight in the eye, my gaze unwavering. Be careful what you wish for, Nathan. Be careful who you throw away. Sometimes they don't come back. The silence that followed was profound. It was the hollow, ringing silence of a void. It was the silence of utter, irreversible defeat. My father had collapsed back into his chair. He looked shrunken, ancient. His shoulders slumped in a way I had never seen before. The great patriarch had been revealed as a coward. The shield was broken. My mother was openly weeping now. Not the performative tears I was used to, but ugly, guttural sobs of pure loss. The queen had been deposed. The hostage was free. And Nathan was just staring, his gaze flicking between the damning photos of his infidelity on Jessica's phone, to the cold, legal documents on the table, then back again, his mind utterly incapable of processing the sheer, brutal totality of his self-inflicted ruin. The crutch was gone. There was nothing more to say. My work here was done. My eyes found Jessica's across the wasteland of the dinner table. Her face was pale and tear-stained, but her eyes were clear. She was looking at me, and for the first time I saw no judgment, no confusion. I saw respect. It was a silent acknowledgement between two people who had been betrayed by the same man, in the same family. I gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a goodbye and a thank you. Then I turned my back on all of it. On all of them. I walked out of the dining room, my footsteps echoing in the cavernous hall. I walked to the front door, not looking back. Behind me, I could hear the sounds beginning to swell again. My mother's hysterics ramping up into a full-blown wail, my father's low, furious cursing, Nathan's broken, choked sobs. They were just noises now, the chaotic death rattle of a world I was no longer a part of. I reached the front door, my hand closing around the cool brass knob. I turned it, opened the door, and stepped out into the crisp, cold November night. I pulled the heavy door shut behind me, and the solid, definitive click of the latch sliding into place was the most beautiful, liberating sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a prison door locking, with me on the outside. It was the sound of the rest of my life beginning. The cold night air was a shock to my system, a clean, sharp slap that jolted me back to my senses. It smelled of damp fallen leaves, cold earth, and the distant, comforting scent of wood smoke from a neighbor's fireplace. For a long moment, I just stood on the porch, my lungs burning as I took one deep, clean breath after another, trying to scrub the toxic, recycled air of that house from my system. The muffled sounds of the implosion I'd left behind were a chaotic symphony of misery, but they were behind a closed door now. They were someone else's problem. I walked to my car, which was parked down the street. My legs felt strangely disconnected from my body, but they moved steadily. I got in, turned the key, and the quiet hum of the engine was a comforting, sane sound. I pulled away from the curb slowly, deliberately, and I did not look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing back there for me to see. I drove for maybe 5 minutes, my mind a perfect, serene blank. I was on autopilot, navigating the familiar suburban streets, my hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. I was heading home, to my quiet, solitary apartment, a place that had often felt lonely but now felt like a sanctuary. Then, as I stopped at a red light on a deserted main street, it began. A tremor. It started in my fingertips, a low-level vibration against the cool leather of the steering wheel. It was a sensation I dismissed at first, but it didn't stop. It grew stronger, spreading like a current up my arms, into my shoulders, until my entire upper body was seized by a violent, uncontrollable shaking. My foot slipped on the brake. I slammed it down again, my heart lurching. I couldn't drive like this. I wrenched the wheel to the right, lurching into the empty, dimly lit parking lot of a closed-down hardware store. The building was dark, the windows boarded up, a forgotten relic of a different time. It felt appropriate. I shoved the car into park and killed the engine. Under the buzzing, sickly orange glow of a single, lonely streetlight, I fell apart. The adrenaline that had been my armor, the icy calm that had carried me through the confrontation, all of it drained away in a sudden, catastrophic rush, leaving behind a raw, gaping void. My forehead dropped against the steering wheel, the hard plastic a painful, grounding pressure. And I wept, not the dignified tears of my mother, or the pathetic sobs of my brother. This was a raw, silent, wrenching grief. Tears I hadn't allowed myself to shed for decades poured down my face, dripping from my chin onto my slacks. I cried for the betrayal, for the lost years, for the quiet, lonely boy who had tried so desperately to be good enough. I cried for the family I should have had, the one you see in holiday commercials, and I mourned its death, even though it had never truly been alive. It was the final, violent exorcism of a poison I had carried in my veins for 32 years. After what felt like an eternity, the shaking subsided. The tears slowed to a trickle, then stopped. I was left with a profound, bone-deep exhaustion that was heavier than sleep, but beneath it, like bedrock, was a feeling I could only identify as peace. A quiet, steady, unshakable peace. I took a deep, shuddering breath, wiped my face on the sleeve of my jacket, and started the car again. This time, my hands were steady. That night, I slept for 10 straight hours. It was a deep, dreamless, leaden sleep. When I woke up, the morning sun was streaming through my window, and the world felt fundamentally different. The air in my apartment seemed lighter. The persistent, low-grade headache I'd lived with for years was gone. The first 2 days were blissfully, beautifully silent. My phone, an object that had long been a source of anxiety, a direct line for my family's needs and dramas, remained dark and quiet. I kept checking it, half expecting a text or a call, but nothing came. It was unnerving, like the eerie calm before a tsunami. On the third day, the wave hit. It began with a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered cautiously. It was my Uncle Mitch. "Michael," he slurred. He sounded like he'd been drinking for 3 days straight. You need to fix this. Your mother is a wreck. You went too far, kid. Way too far." "Did I, Mitch?" I asked, my voice surprisingly calm. "Or did I simply finish the job that all of you started?" I hung up the phone before he could formulate a response. An hour later, the full-scale assault began. It was a coordinated attack, a desperate, multi-front war to regain control. My mother left a series of voicemails that were a masterclass in narcissistic manipulation. The first was tearful, pleading, "Michael, baby, I don't know what we did to make you so angry, so full of hate, but please, please call me. We can talk this through. I love you, honey. I'm your mother." The second, left an hour later, was dripping with venom. "How could you do this? How could you humiliate your family in front of Jessica? You are a cruel, cold, ungrateful boy, and you will be sorry for this. You will be all alone, and you will have deserved it." The third, left close to midnight, was back to a pathetic, sobbing plea. "Nathan is a mess. Jessica left him. She packed a bag and she's gone. She took the ring. This is your fault, Michael. You did this. You have to fix it." My father, a man who despised texting, sent a single, blunt message that was a perfect encapsulation of his personality. "You have created a catastrophe. You will make this right." It wasn't a request. It was an order from a deposed king who hadn't yet realized his decrees were meaningless. Nathan sent a flurry of incoherent, misspelled texts. "Jess is gone. She won't answer my calories. She blocked me. Please talk to her for me, Mike. Tell her it was a mistake. You owe me this." I read them all one by one, like a historian studying artifacts from a dead civilization. And I felt nothing. The old hooks, the familiar triggers of guilt and obligation, had no purchase. They slid right off me. They were just words on a screen from people I used to know, people who lived on a different planet. I could have just blocked their numbers then and there, but that felt insufficient. Felt like a defensive measure. I wanted to make an offensive move. I wanted to build a fortress, not just put up a fence. The next morning, I walked into a Verizon store. The store was bright, clean, and smelled faintly of industrial carpet cleaner. A young man with a cheerful name tag that read Kevin greeted me. "How can I help you today?" he asked. "I'd like to change my phone number," I said. He tapped away at his tablet. "Sure thing. Any particular reason? Moving? Getting a lot of spam calls?" he asked, just making friendly conversation. I allowed myself a small, genuine smile. "Something like that," I said. "You could call it a deep, personal spam problem. I'm starting a new life." He laughed, processed the request, and handed me a new SIM card. I walked out of the store into the bright morning sun. I popped the old SIM card out of my phone, looked at the tiny piece of plastic that had been my leash for so long, and dropped it into a city trash can on the corner. It made a tiny, insignificant sound as it landed among the coffee cups and newspapers. Another chain broken. They couldn't reach me anymore. The line was officially, permanently, dead. 8 months later, I was standing on the small balcony of my apartment in Portland, Oregon, a city that had only existed in my imagination for most of my life. The air was cool and carried the scent of damp earth and pine needles, a clean, fresh smell that was the complete opposite of the stagnant, recycled air of my parents' suburban home. Below me, the city hummed with a vibrant, creative energy. It felt like I had not just moved across the country, but to a different universe. Leaving my hometown was the single most selfish and liberating act of my life. I had half expected my boss to laugh when I applied for the internal transfer to the Portland office, but instead, he'd called me in. "Michael," he'd said, "your analytics on the last quarter were brilliant. You've earned a shot. Go make us proud." I packed my car with 2 suitcases, a box of books, and my computer, sold or gave away everything else, and drove west until the landscape of my old life was just a bitter memory in the rearview mirror. The new job was everything I'd hoped for. It was challenging, the work was complex, and my new team was a diverse group of smart, funny people who judged me on the quality of my work, not on my family connections or my willingness to be a doormat. My new boss, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah, once called me into her office after I'd identified a critical flaw in a major client's financial projections. I'd braced myself for criticism, but instead, she just looked at me over her glasses and said, "Evans, that was good, sharp work. You saved us a major headache. Keep it up." That simple, professional validation felt more rewarding than any grudging compliment my family had ever given me. I was slowly, cautiously, building a new life. I reconnected with David, who flew out for a long weekend. We rented a car and drove out to the coast, spending the day hiking through misty forests and watching the powerful Pacific waves crash against the rocky shore. As we sat on a piece of driftwood, drinking coffee from a thermos, he looked at me, a proud, brotherly grin on his face. "Look at you, man," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Happy, healthy, free. You actually did it." I was making new friends, too. People from my hiking club, from work, from the weekly trivia night at a local brewery where my encyclopedic knowledge of 80s movie quotes was finally appreciated. They were simple, uncomplicated friendships, built on a foundation of shared interests and mutual respect, not on a tangled web of guilt, history, and obligation. Then, one Tuesday afternoon in late summer, as I was leaving my office building, I saw her. She was waiting across the street, looking small and out of place against the backdrop of the bustling city. My first reaction was a jolt of pure, cold panic. The old fight-or-flight response, the ingrained fear that my family had somehow found me. But as I looked closer, I realized it was my cousin, Laura. I hadn't seen or spoken to her since that fateful Thanksgiving. She looked diminished. She was thinner, her face was pale, and the easy, bubbly smile she always wore was gone, replaced by a tense, nervous anxiety that seemed to radiate off her. I crossed the street. "Laura," I said, my voice carefully neutral. I didn't move to hug her. I kept my briefcase held in front of me like a small shield. "What are you doing in Portland?" "Michael," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Hi. I flew out this morning. I got your address from the company directory. I know I shouldn't have, but I had to talk to you. I had to do it in person." She looked so utterly lost that a part of me, the old caretaker, the family fixer, felt a flicker of pity. I ruthlessly extinguished it. Pity was the door I had just learned to close. "Okay," I said, my tone businesslike. "You have 5 minutes." We stood there on the busy downtown sidewalk, commuters and tourists flowing around us like a river around 2 stones. She took a ragged breath. "I came here to say I'm sorry," she said, finally forcing herself to look at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed and filled with tears. "What I did, just sitting there, letting it happen. It was wrong. It was cowardly. You paid for my education, Michael. You paid for my chance at a better life, and I sat there and clapped when they threw you away like you were garbage. There's no excuse for it. None. She fumbled in her purse and pulled out a crumpled, thick envelope. She held it out to me, her hand trembling. It's not much, she said. It's $500. I got a second job waitressing on weekends. I'm gonna pay you back. All of it. Every single dime. It's the only thing I can think of to do. I looked at the envelope, then back at her face. I saw real shame there, real remorse. The family implosion hadn't just destroyed Nathan's life. It had been a brutal wake-up call for her, forcing her to finally see the toxic swamp she had been swimming in her whole life. Thank you, Laura, I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. I took the envelope from her. I appreciate this. I know it doesn't fix anything, she whispered, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. But I had to try. It's a start, I acknowledged. It was infinitely more than I had ever received from anyone else who shared my blood. I accepted her apology, but I didn't offer to buy her a coffee. I didn't ask her where she was staying. I didn't promise to keep in touch. I was learning the most important lesson of my life. Forgiveness and access are two entirely different things. I could forgive her for her weakness, but I didn't have to invite that weakness back into my carefully constructed peace. Life went on. The fall came, and the trees in Portland set the city on fire with color. I was genuinely, deeply happy, but I was also learning that healing isn't a simple, linear path to a happy ending. The first Christmas Eve in my new city was a challenge. My small apartment was cheerful, with a little tree and lights strung across the window. My friends had invited me to a dozen different parties and get-togethers. But that evening, after getting home from work, as I stood in my quiet living room, a profound wave of loneliness washed over me. It was sharp and unexpected, an ambush of grief. I found myself staring out the window at the rain-slicked street, watching other families walk by, their arms laden with brightly wrapped gifts, and I felt a pang for the idealized family Christmas I'd always craved as a child. The one I saw in movies, the one that had never, ever existed for me. It was a phantom limb, an ache for something that was gone but had never really been there in the first place. Just as the sadness began to feel overwhelming, my phone buzzed. It was a group text from my trivia team. My friend, Ben, had sent a photo of his cat wearing a tiny Santa hat. The text read, "Emergency trivia prep at the Hopping Hare. Topic, 80s action movies. Ugly sweaters are not optional. First round is on me. Be there in 20. I looked from my own sad reflection in the dark window to the ridiculous photo on my phone, and a slow, genuine smile spread across my face. I had a family. It wasn't the one I was born into. It was the one I was building, one trivia night, one hiking trip, one shared joke at a time. I went to my closet, pulled out the ugliest, most obnoxious Christmas sweater I owned, and headed out the door to meet my real family. Another year spun by, then another. Life settled into a rhythm that was not just comfortable, but joyful. I got the promotion at work and then another one after that. I was now leading my own team of analysts. Sarah, the kind, funny architect, became more than just someone I was dating. We moved in together, blending my minimalist style with her chaotic, creative energy. Our apartment was filled with books, plants, and laughter. My chosen family of friends became the people we spent holidays with, the people we called in an emergency, the people who showed up. The memories of my old life, the constant anxiety, the feeling of being a human checkbook, began to feel less like a personal history and more like a case study I'd once read about. Then, one rainy Tuesday evening in early spring, as Sarah and I were in the kitchen attempting to make homemade pasta, my phone rang. It was an unknown number, but the area code was a ghost from the past. A little knot of ice, a relic of old trauma, formed in my stomach. My first instinct was to decline the call, to let it vanish into the ether. But then I looked at the life I had built. I looked at Sarah, her face dusted with flour, laughing as she untangled a sheet of pasta from the roller. I looked at the warmth and safety of our home. I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. I excused myself and stepped out onto the balcony. The air was cool and smelled of rain. I hit accept. "Hello, Michael." The voice on the other end was thin, reedy, almost unrecognizable, but I knew it instantly. It was my mother, Margaret. "Oh, Michael, thank God. I wasn't sure if this was still your number. I got it from, well, it doesn't matter." She didn't wait for a response. She launched directly into a frantic, rambling, tearful monologue. It was a greatest hits collection of her past performances. But this time, the desperation was raw and unfiltered. She talked about the house, how the bank was threatening foreclosure, how the second mortgage payments were impossible, how your father's pension was barely enough to cover their medical bills. She told me Nathan was living in their basement, that he'd lost another job, that he was drinking again. It was a litany of failure and despair. "We made a mistake, baby," she sobbed, her voice cracking. "A terrible, terrible mistake. We were wrong. We miss you so much. We need you. Your father, his health isn't good. Please, Michael, can you just help us? Just this one last time? To save the house. For the family." I listened. I didn't interrupt. I let her pour all of her poison, all of her misery, all of her manipulative grief into the phone. The old me, the boy she had raised, would have been shredded by the guilt. He would have already been logging into his bank account, calculating how much he could afford to sacrifice to make the pain stop. But that boy was gone. I had buried him a long time ago. When she finally ran out of breath, her sobs subsiding into ragged, hiccuping gasps, a profound silence fell. She was waiting for me to speak, to offer the solution, to be the fixer one last time. I took a deep breath of the cool, clean Portland air. The knot in my stomach was gone. In its place, there was only a vast, calm, quiet stillness. The ghost was finally being laid to rest. I thought about all the things I could say. I could have screamed at her. I could have reminded her of every lie, every betrayal, every single dollar. I could have listed all the ways she had broken me. I could have hung up without a word. Instead, I chose peace. I chose freedom. "I'm sorry to hear that you are all in such a difficult situation," I said, and my voice was calm, steady, and devoid of malice. "I truly hope you find a way to work it all out." There was a moment of stunned silence on her end. I could almost hear her mind trying to process what I'd said. She was waiting for the but I'll help you, but I'll send the money. It never came. "I wish you all the best," I said, my voice gentle but final. "Goodbye, Margaret." Using her first name was the last lock clicking into place. She was no longer Mom. She was just Margaret, person from my past. A ghost on the other end of the phone. I ended the call before she could utter another word. Then, with a few simple taps on the screen, I blocked the number forever. I stood there for another moment, looking out at the city lights twinkling in the deepening twilight. Then I turned and went back inside, back to the warmth, back to the laughter, back to the woman I loved, back to the life I had built, not with blood, but with intention. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way, and maybe even gave you a little bit of strength if you need it. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect your own peace and well-being? I'd be honored if you shared your own story or thoughts in the comments below. And please, if the story touched you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more content. It really does help the channel out.